and thank you for joining the African American Chamber of Commerce for another Influencers Breakfast. My name is Felicia Harris Williams, and I am the marketing partner with the African American Chamber of Commerce. I do want to let everyone know that the chat is open, so please feel free to comment and ask your questions throughout the conversation. At the end of the conversation with Regina and our councilwoman, we will allow you to turn your mic on to ask a question if you raise your hand. So without further ado, Regina A. Hairston.
Good morning, Felicia. Can you take down the screen for me? Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Welcome members, board members, staff, and especially welcome our special guest, Councilwoman Sanchez. We are so excited to hear from her today and to get her take on the mayor's proposed budget. This is our second part of this series. If you joined us yesterday, I'm sure there are more questions and we can't wait to hear from her. I would like to read her bio because without all this great information, you might not understand why this conversation is so important to have with this particular councilwoman and the chairwoman for the Appropriations Committee. So please bear with me while I read her bio. Councilwoman Maria Quiñones Sánchez is a veteran activist with over 30 years of service to the city of Philadelphia, currently serving her fourth four-year term representing Eastern North Philadelphia's 7th Council District. She made history in November 2007 when she rallied grassroots support, becoming the first Latina elected to city council and quickly became a rising star for her hard work and commitment to government reform. Her legislative accomplishments include the Freshman 15, good government reforms, the creation of the Philadelphia Land Bank, tax foreclosures reform, AVI assistance for vulnerable homeowners, a long-time owner-occupant program, a property tax deferral program, landmark water affordability legislation, and securing $100 million in new funding for affordable housing as part of her progressive agenda to keep people in their homes. A champion for Philadelphia's small businesses and manufacturers, Maria authored historic business tax reform, drastically reducing the tax burden on small businesses and helping local manufacturing compete globally. She also expanded tax benefits for benefit corporations, which contributed to their communities and create family-sustaining jobs. So without further ado, I bring to you Council Member Maria Sanchez. Good morning, Council Member.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Thank you so very much, Regina, and welcome. This is the first event I do in your new role as Executive Director. Thank you to the board members and the membership of the organization for inviting me to this discussion. Looking forward to getting right in.
Awesome. So with that, we're going to go with the first question. So we had the mayor here yesterday, and we asked him the same question, and I'm going to pose it to you. So Councilwoman, you have been consistent on your tax policy stance, the need to remove barriers to growth. The mayor has proposed cuts to the wage tax and the business income and receipts tax that would gradually shrink taxpayer obligations over the next 5 years. Under the Kinney plan, BERT would decrease from a rate of 6.1% to 6%. By fiscal year 2026, BERT would be at 5.25%. Over 5 years, the city expects there will be $343 million of wage tax and BERT cuts. Do you think this rate of reduction will have a significant impact on Black and Brown owned businesses over the 5-year plan?
So first, I want to give a context. The BERT reform work that's been done and the reduction schedule as proposed was part of our compromise work when back in 2010-11, we led a discussion around the elimination of the net profits tax. So the $100,000 exemption and the commitment to reduce net income tax was part of the compromise. So in theory, I agree that that is the right step. What I don't agree with right now at this intersection that we are, I don't believe that is going to get to the core of what we're trying to deal with, given the pandemic, given the social unrest, and our now renewed commitment to Black and Brown businesses. So what would I do instead, right? Because ultimately it's like, okay, you don't agree with this, but what would I do instead? I'm a data-driven person. I will debate policy, but I think data is important. And I think the administration has agreed that when we get the 2020 returns, because of the delayed returns, it will show a couple of things. And in fact, President Biden's talking about this. President Biden's whole jobs plan is based on increasing corporate liability, particularly for large multinationals. This tax reduction plan doesn't get to that. What we saw in the pandemic was that the larger the corporations were, and they became essential corporations, Target, Walmart, they significantly didn't increase their contribution to the markets in which they operate. Those are exactly the corporations that Biden is saying, you got to pay your fair share. This tax reduction plan doesn't get to the core of that, of how we're going to reduce taxes for the people we want to help, by at the same time capturing income from people who don't pay their fair share. This doesn't do it. The only place that does it is in our gross receipts model. So you have to do one of two things. You have to say, let's increase the gross receipts so that these big corporations pay more, and let's eliminate the net profit so these small businesses who hide their growth cannot capitalize and cannot expand. So that conversation, I think, is coming. But it's really important that we be responsible with looking at the 2020 COVID returns to see what happens. But my question to members, to your members is, when you look at your liability, right? And we can talk about the 157 steps it takes to open up a business. We can talk about the 27 taxes you have to pay that some of us say we're nickel and diming them. Ultimately, the net profits tax is the one that causes the burden for small businesses, particularly those under $1 million, but Black and Brown businesses also.
So that raises a good point. So for those of you who are joining us today, Tasha has sent out a survey that asks just that question. And it's so super important that you fill out that survey so we can go back to the Councilwoman and say, this is what our members think. And then she can advocate for us in City Council and to push that forward. So great time for us to talk about this. And Councilwoman, would you say, from an advocacy standpoint, and when we bring that information, this is the perfect time to have that conversation?
In addition to having the tax liability conversation, I think there's a regulatory conversation that needs to happen in how we nickel and dime small businesses. I think one of the biggest frustration businesses, and we've heard it from small businesses, particularly on the COVID, the ones who had to shut down. You know, we increased trash fees in the middle of that. We asked landlords to work with us and not evict people, but then we still have, a renter license fee, a suitability fee. So I think there's different structural relief that we can provide that is fairer and broader for all the folks who under COVID sacrificed and worked with us, right? Like small landlords worked with us. We should not penalize them. Small businesses, hair salons, those businesses were closed, and yet we increased their trash fee. So there's a lot of space here. If you're saying we want to provide $300 million in relief, we could be more targeted and more focused.
Absolutely. So when we start to think about the relief and some of the things that we can do, and we think about this one-time infusion of cash coming from the American Rescue Plan, how do you envision those dollars should be spent? Mayor Kinney was with us yesterday, and he's using that money to make up for the budget gap. What is your thoughts on that?
So, we all say we don't want to go back to normal because normal wasn't fair and it wasn't just. So filling in the gap to go back to normal to me is not bold enough, right? In us realigning how we look at government. So what are the things we learned? We learned that during COVID, we had to become wiser about how we connected with people. We learned that people needed access to technology and they needed internet access. And we learned that there is a huge gap between who has access and who doesn't. So going back to normal and saying we're just going to fill the holes without realigning all of our business practices so that we can say, if we ever got into another pandemic or another situation, we know where our businesses are, we know what the gaps were around their capacity to solicit national relief. Because one of the things we learned during COVID was that small businesses, back office, did not have the capacity to be able to really access these funds. None of what we're doing here reflects that realignment or that learning, right? It's just sort of like, we're going to do more of the same. And then let's get into the whole procurement conversation around, what we're doing has not worked in terms of ensuring Black and brown businesses access, from being able to say, we are penalizing folks when they become minority contractors to prime contracts because we force a relationship with someone who really doesn't want to work with a minority business, and we don't build capacity for folks to be their own prime because we don't debundle contracts. So it's sort of like, again, we're going back to setting up people to failure and not using this moment in time to say, no, we're going to debundle, we're going to give real access to folks, and we're going to help capitalize them using and leveraging our banking capacity.
Right, that you bring up an interesting point. So when we talk about debundling some of the contracts, and we talk about how the city measures participation by minority contractors, we always look at this number of 35%. What do you think about a setting that, I don't know if it's the ceiling or the floor? What is your opinion?
It is awful. And I'm going to be able to demonstrate through some of the work we're doing with our partner organizations and rebuild our project user structure, which I fought for. We have construction projects that are coming in 80-90% minority in our rebuild because of our project users' capacity, right? And willingness to really say, we're going to open this process up. So, when the administration continues to say, it's 30, and we have departments that, for instance, in the water department, they have their contracts, but then you have the whole water fund, the airport authority. Like, we're really missing that the big picture. The city's capital budget is 12 billion, but then there's the airport, and then there's the water fund. And it's sort of like, I always tell people, don't eat the candy because the ice cream truck's about to come, right? So we miss out on the ice cream because we're here, we took the candy. So I think that, again, this is a space where political will has to be on the table. If there's any moment in time, right, where we can demand real access to the building trades, right, which nobody always wants to talk about, we will always want to work around access to building trades and those jobs for our young people and for our skilled workforce, right? We have electricians and plumbers and all these people who have never been given access to the unions. And then we have this ability and this infrastructure money that's coming, billions of dollars in infrastructure, and we got to do things differently. So 35%, we should laugh out the door from the very beginning and say, no, that's not the way we're doing business. And contractors who don't do that should not be awarded at all. And this is not about expelling someone in the middle of the work. Is you can't be a responsible bidder if you didn't responsibly manage your last contract.
So let's talk about that, Councilwoman. Where currently, I don't think, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, there isn't a consequence. So if that doesn't happen, we just continue to select the same contractors over and over. What should be the process, or what could be the process to ensure that that doesn't happen time and time again?
So one of the challenges, because we have so much bureaucracy in our capital systems, right, in our capital contracting, the cost of doing business. In fact, I asked PICA formally during a budget hearing, and then formally in the letter. Yesterday, we had City Controller Rebecca Reinhardt at the budget hearing. I asked her, and I will formally ask her again. Philadelphia is out of whack with every other peer city as it relates to capital. And why? Salary range, we're out of whack. Cost of doing business, we're out of whack. Cost of estimation that comes in, the issue of overruns, the issue of not meeting timelines. So this is a management issue. This is about, we have bad actors that give us 10 different reasons why they should never contract with the city again, but we don't utilize it. And then we always use, well, we got to get this project done. Yeah, but at what cost? At what cost are we doing this? So we don't get the jobs, we don't get the earnings from the Philadelphia work base, and then the contractor still makes out. So to me, it's real simple. If you have more than one contract in the city of Philadelphia and you're not meeting the timeline and you're not meeting the cost estimates, you're not a responsible bidder and you should be banned from bidding on anything else. We start there.
Awesome. And I just want to say, participants, I see all of the questions in the chat. Councilwoman, they have some questions for you this morning. So if you all will allow me to go through the ones that were previously submitted, then I'll take the ones that are in the chat. The second question is around minority developers in affordable housing. How can the city better support minority developers and small business in the city who are working to renovate affordable multi-unit housing?
Yeah, this is a great time to have that conversation. I know that John Thomas is working with minority contractors. The collective is minority developers who've come forward, and we see some energy around organizing. And we had the collective come and testify for the $400 million bond deal that we're doing in the city of Philadelphia, where we're going to invest in neighborhoods. I think this is one of those places where council in particular, using our bond money, should really be very intentional of saying, we're going to invest this money with folks who are really going to hire and provide opportunities for minority developers and minority contractors. And I think you're going to see a lot more energy in that space and people willing to push the market on that. I think PIDC has begun to better align some of their product lines around financing and providing credit lines for folks that who then we can marry those two spaces. Is it enough? Absolutely not. I think the city has to better ensure that when a contractor or developer is working for us, and this is why when someone contracts with a prime, this is how we hurt them. You know, the prime gets paid first, right? And so the subcontractor, right? So you're in a secondary position. You know, if you have to wait 180 days to get paid, we run you out of business. So we have to, and by the way, the city does it when it wants to. It will front load some of this payment schedule when they want to. And that's when you'll see real political will to say, we want someone to contract with the city of Philadelphia, but we're not going to bankrupt them in that process because of our bureaucracy. So I think in this space, this is the moment in time to say what we're doing is not enough.
Right, and so let's tie that to the budget. If we believe that the land bank, which you sponsored that legislation or that bill in 2013 to create the land bank, and if we believe that the land bank would provide some affordable housing, in this budget, it has been zeroed out. So what say you?
So one of the things that I will tell you, you know, I was a former CEO and executive, and this notion of, you know, you're gonna make people continue to advocate for things you say are important. Like, I'm getting tired of this budget game that we play, right? I'm chair of appropriations now, so I hear what people say and then I watch where they put their money. So I'm just like really tired. So the land bank won't be zeroed out, but the land bank doesn't work either. You know, the capacity that we have there is limited. And we're setting it up for failure. I'll give you an example. We're working with PHA and we signed a deal with 4 CDCs in South Kensington because of the gentrification and worked with PHA to pipeline 240 properties for affordability in South Kensington. This is everything below Lehigh in the PHA inventory. Most of that inventory is next to a land bank property. So now, even PHA, which sometimes is more cumbersome, is ahead of the curve from the land bank and our ability to pipeline projects. So it will not be zeroed out, but it does not have the capacity. So what is missing in the city of Philadelphia? We don't have a director of housing. We need to get a director of housing. We need a land bank that's fully funded with capacity to do this work. And the goal of the land bank shouldn't be to raise money. The goal of the land bank is to ensure equity, right? If we auction off the highest value property, we're not going to ensure affordability in those neighborhoods and access for Black and brown people. So for me, like there's these competing interests in the city. And the land bank should not be about raising money. It should be about ensuring equity and access. And those higher value properties are where we have to make sure we have affordability. That's not the way we're working now. So Director of Housing, more capacity and financial resources at the land bank. And then when we roll out the neighborhood preservation initiative, we need someone leading that too. We need high level people of color, dare I say that, right, in the mix of that, to really ensure equity as we roll out these investments.
Yeah, and I think this is a great place where you can say that. So we are happy.
No, I'll say it everywhere because
I know that you will.
I sound like a broken record, but I'm gonna keep playing the song until someone dances with me.
So let's move the conversation to, there were some questions around art. So in culture, New York recently pledged $25 million to create a program directly to employ artists to help find solutions to the city's problems. Should and would the city of Philadelphia be willing to invest in the art sector at the same level? Art businesses, particularly small and micro businesses, generate massive amounts of economic activity across business sectors with very small amounts of investment from the city government. At a 3,000 return on investment for city spending, would the city consider investing in the recovery plan by putting 1% of the city spending in the arts and creative economy? This would equate to 60 million for the arts industry.
So here's what I would say to you, because I do think the return on investment is clear. Cultural Alliance's study, every study we know, we had this discussion, I served for 8 years on the Cultural Fund Board and the work that they do. Here's what I would also say, add to that. I really think we need to align all the different places where we're investing in this sector. We have a hotel tax. We have a capital program where we provide capital improvements to the Dell, to the Man, to the Art Museum. I really think we need to, this is a time for us to put all this cultural arts investment that we do and look at it through an equity lens and say, how we're spending their money, does that reflect the return on investment and the kind of diversity that we want to encourage, right? So that when we put more, we're not putting more to a system that we all know historically, very important. Art Museum, Kimmel Center, all of those things are very important to Philadelphia. It's not an either or, it's an and it's sort of like, how do we ensure diversity, right? How do we make sure that neighborhood-based amenities around arts and culture? And then, Council member Catherine Gilmore Richardson and Isaiah Thomas did this arts conversation that really amplified some of the work that David O had been doing around the creative economy. And it's sort of like what we saw there was there's a real need in the nonprofit world, but this is for-profit local artists component that we have to. We have 1% art for capital projects, right? Are we making sure that 1% goes to our local artists? Like, how many of our local artists have really applied for some of that money? The $300 million park we're about to build downtown, that budget is $400,000. How many of our artists are really going to have the capacity to do that? We're doing a pilot at Rivera with our 1%, where we not only set up a community committee, we gave artists $1,000 to conceptualize their plan so that local artists could actually compete in that process. Because what we saw is that they didn't have the capacity to do that. So, for the arts community, let's really line up everything, all the investments, and say, in this space, are we going to be as open and diverse as we need to be? So that, again, we're not going back to normal, but we're really inspiring and motivating and being very targeted around the energy, right, that is out there, including social media and all the other things that we know have changed that creative economy.
So you raise a very interesting point. You said it should be looked at through the lens, an equity lens. Currently, if I'm not mistaken, when the agencies for the city come before you to testify for their budget, there is supposed to be some type of equity lens that is to be applied. Do you find that's working? Are agencies actually providing that information? And is it a way to measure it?
So this is an area that's been really, really frustrating. You know, we went from, we're going to do zero-based budgeting to performance-based budgeting to making sure that departments gave us new hire information, language access information, salary ranges, and all this space, right? And now this new equity lens that really the administration hasn't provided a matrix. My understanding is that there's some sort of work group in the different departments that is looking at all of this, that it's supposed to provide, you know, a different way of looking at things. But I have many examples where the city now has an opportunity to leverage its impact and chooses not to, right? So in the health space, for instance, we have allocated about $30 million to build a health center. And we have an opportunity to build a supermarket and a health center at the Frankfurt Transportation Center. And the health department has found every excuse as to why it doesn't want to build in Frankfurt. Why? Because staff people don't want to go to Frankfurt, right? So never mind the 5,000 patients in Frankfurt who need that healthcare access and need the supermarket. It's sort of like, let's entertain the 50 staff people who don't want to go to Frankfurt to work. So again, I keep hearing the equity lens, but I don't see it because they're going back again to doing what they did pre-COVID, pre-social unrest, as opposed to saying, how can we be really deliberate around leveraging our work?
So this is a great segue into the next question. Is there money in the budget allocated for civic community engagement work to combat the impact of the COVID pandemic on community wellness? Further, is there programming plan to engage the North Philadelphia Kensington community in wellness work?
So I've asked during this budget process, and I'm waiting for, you know, an itemization of every funded city initiative with a nexus to Kensington, because my argument is that we have a lot of money, but if it's not aligned and it's not leveraged, no one feels it, right? Because the city has thrown everything up that it can into Kensington, and you go to Kensington and the residents don't feel it. We've trapped an entire community. And then healthcare access is a perfect example. I asked this the other day during our hearings about Kensington. It was sort of like, what are we doing about the trauma that we're inflicting on this generation of folks where we've allowed open air drug markets and open air drug utilization? And it's sort of like, well, you can call this number. Like, not trauma informed, not, you know, we're normalizing behavior that should never be normalized for children. Like, what are we doing about safety corridors for kids now that we're going back to school? How are we going to give their children their spaces? There was an article recently about young people mistreating the homeless at McPherson Square. And of course, the press calls me and says, well, what are we going to do with these young people? And I'm like, we've taken over their spaces. They're reacting to our negligence. Like, I'm going to criminalize young people? No, I don't want any person who's homeless or vulnerable hurt, but that's the trauma on the other end, that until we fix this stuff, and it can't be like, we got to meet people where they are, and as a result of that, we're going to entrap an entire community. Those can't be the extremes of the responses. There has to be a middle of, we meet people where they are, but we don't trap an entire community while we figure it out. And that's what's missing in this. As it relates to, there's going to be a lot of national money around health equity. And, you know, the administration, and now that Farley's gone, I really think we really need to drill down on, you know, are we going to give access? What we learned from Philly Fighting COVID, the Black Doctors Consortium, and all those things is, again, we say we're going to do things differently, but, you know, every time there's an opportunity to do something different and better, we've not demonstrated the capacity to do that. I mean, Farley fought us tooth and nail about funding the Black Doctors, you know, Consortium. All of these quasi-governmental agencies that we funnel money through, PHMC, which was the one that ended up funding Philly for COVID, like, we need transparency in that space, and making sure that people who are funded to do work within our communities look like us, have lived experience like us. And when we start unpacking that, there's a system that is not only not fair, but there is a well-oiled system that needs transparency.
And so does City Council plan to offer up some names for the next health commissioner?
I think it's really important that this process be a real search, right? And I'm always for new people coming in and bringing new ideas. But historically, when we've brought people from outside, we haven't had good results. And part of it is Philadelphia is a neighborhood of cities. We have all these idiosyncrasies, right? You come from somewhere and it takes a while. The learning curve takes a long time, but I believe that with the eds and meds in the city of Philadelphia that we have, I cannot believe that we don't have talent that reflects that Philadelphia spirit and brings the capacity to make the health department more open and more transparent, right? No one should ever, and again, Farley through the COVID, the burden of trying to make decisions and everybody second guessing you, I'm not going to minimize the impact in that. But from day one, I've never felt like he had that equity lens and understood that. Like when you close businesses, the types of businesses that you close down, whether it's barbershops, hair salons, all of those things really impact neighborhoods very differently than when you tell, big companies who can make adjustments. We had that conversation with opening up the restaurants, right? He wanted all this filtration system and all this other stuff. And we knew small restaurants, takeout places didn't have the capacity to do that. So again, that's where the lack of understanding Philadelphia and the equity lens is hugely important. So we want, a real search and one that really values the talent that we have locally in our ed and med sector.
Awesome. So I think, like I said, there's so many questions people are really wanting to ask you. So Felicia, if we can open.
I'm Latina, I can speak fast. So.
Felicia, if we can take questions, please.
Did you want to start with the ones that were already submitted?
Sure. Do you want to read them, please?
Okay. Jeff Hornstein, you asked about 5 different questions, Jeff. So if you can just limit it to one question, Jeff, and I see your hand is up. So I will allow you to talk to ask just one question. You asked 5, you can just pick one to ask so that we can get to the other questions.
The Economy League.
Good morning, Councilwoman.
Good morning, Jeff.
Always a pleasure to hear you. And sorry I'm being the first loud white guy, but I have another meeting to jump to and I just wanted to get in something. We're thrilled. I'm now on the board of the African American Chamber. They're on our board, and it's a great partnership in the making. And thrilled that Regina is at the helm because she's doing a great job so far. So procurement reform is something that we are really deeply involved in at the Economy League through our PAGE initiative with the eds and meds institutions. Just wanted to flag for you that we've started a real estate and construction subcommittee that Chop, Jefferson, and Driscoll are leading, along with a group of Black real estate professionals who actually came to us and said, "Hey, can we put this under your flag?" So I think some of the learnings that we are going to be developing there are going to be applicable across the public sector too. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. I mean, obviously, there's new energy in the building trades with Ryan Boyer taking over as president. I think maybe we can finally get past the racism that has dominated that. I mean, that's probably Pollyannish, but I'm an optimist. So how do we get Black and brown businesses to the grown-ups table, right? For years and years and years, Black and brown businesses, we've been told they don't have the capacity, so they have to be subs. But the whole prime sub model is kind of like a not quite a sharecropping model, but there's an element of the majority white contractors sit at the grown-ups table, they make decisions, and they bring the subcontractors in after the fact. And as you said, it's like a forced marriage of sorts. How do we change that structure, and how can the public sector lead on that?
One of the things so thank you, Jeff. And I know that, this is a space where we need all hands on deck, right? I think there's a role for community college to play around some of this business development stuff. I think there's a major role for the ethnic chambers to play around mentoring, building those true mentorships between smaller business and growing the existing businesses, and then also working for new businesses in the contracting space. But this is really, again, I had this conversation with Rebecca when Rebecca created her CAO position before she ran. We held dozens of hours of hearings where we say ultimately it's about the bundling and giving people their own contract to manage, right? And the ability to grow through that process by making sure that we don't ruin their financial capacity by not paying them on time. The city government, procuring with the city government, when you're not getting paid for 180 days makes it almost impossible. And when you talk to those contractors, that's what they will tell you. I don't want to be a sub because I'm not getting paid for 180 days. And then all of the back office requirements that we have. So I think if we're, again, the debundling, there's tons of infrastructure stuff coming and helping people grow in that space by giving them their own contract. I think there's a cottage industry around project management that we need to really explore, that is very different than what we have now, right? We have, whether it's the school district where we need a new PLA and they better hire our high school students, particularly the kids who graduate with CTE credentials. But this whole project management piece that I think, and the city has to pay for it, right? We have to be willing to pay for it. This lowest responsible bidder definition needs to be redefined. Lowest responsible bidder means that we're going to get the work done, but we're also going to have an impact in the project that is broader than just meeting the deadline that, by the way, we don't meet. Very few. If we looked at how many contracts we meet, there is a game to be played with the bidding process, with knowing which departments you're going to be able to stretch out. And I've had this conversation with contractors. All you have to do is go to the tailgating party at the Eagles, and you can talk to every major contractor who will give you his insights around the game and how it's played, from bidding to pricing, to managing. And so we all know it, but that culture is not going to open up. I think there's some building trades folks, obviously local 57, that's very diverse, local 332, which Ryan Boyer heads, which is diverse. I think the plumbers have been more open to some of this, the sheet metal workers union, the carpenters have been open to this, but they represent a small sector of the bigger picture of, how do we not kill contractors and get contractors to be willing to sign on with the unions? Because my conversations with minority contractors is, I'm not signing with the union because they let the big guys be double-breasted. They do union work in the city, non-union work outside the city, but if one of our contractors does that, they come after them.
Okay, Regina, do you want to go to another question from the audience?
I think we have time for one more.
Okay, because James Jackson had his hand raised for a while, so I was going to give him an opportunity to ask his question. James?
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, Councilwoman. Nice to see you again. Enjoyed your coming on our arts rally, and wanted to say thank you for that. I asked one of the questions about the arts and arts funding. I also wanted to highlight that 60 million has been now pledged by Chicago. Oregon is investing 50 million in Portland, and Omaha, Nebraska is investing 10 million in arts and culture. Philadelphia, so far in budget negotiations, which you're in the midst of right now, is only looking at investing 2 million. We're being vastly outspent by Omaha, Nebraska. And arts and culture is the direction that we have chosen in this city for the past 20 years or so to try and stabilize and invigorate the economy. What can we do in the arts and culture sector as businesses to affirm that to city council and to the mayor's office that we need the funding coming in? I mean, I understand your equity lens argument, but the arts and culture sector isn't really one that suffers from, especially in direct spending, from an equity lens problem as much as some other sectors. So how do we get more funding into this section of the economy and really spur growth and recovery from the COVID pandemic?
So I think we haven't landed on what the final number is going to be. I think the advocacy work being done by the sector is hugely important. The only thing that I would caution you is we are spending a lot of money in arts and culture. It's just, who do we spend it with, right? Millions of dollars dedicated to the man, millions of dollars dedicated to the art museum, millions of dollars, dedicated to Bartram Gardens around some of the work that they're doing. So I agree with you that. And that's why I think we should put all the listing together and say, of all the things we're doing, where is it that we want this new money to go into, so it just doesn't fall into that pot that is there. But I will subscribe to you that when we do that itemization, there's a lot more money in that sector than most folks know about. And that's where the equity lens becomes important, because if we're going to spend $50 million a year, which is probably less than we actually have, in supporting arts and cultural facilities, people should know that. We have the 1% art that we do that's tied into our capital budget. The arts community should know who's getting that, right? And then we have the very important work that the Cultural Fund does, and we have the work that we're doing through the new $1 million grant. So there's the stuff we've been doing that nobody knows about. There's the stuff that we've done that has proven to be effective. And then there's the stuff that we're doing that's innovative, that we believe is innovative, that we heard from all of you in your rally and other stuff, because we're funding in the cultural world, but mostly in the nonprofit space. And the part of the conversation was like, how do we also support for-profit artists, independent artists? So I think the number is going to be bigger. I just want to make sure that when we do it, we know what's on the table and we know who we want to help.
So we do want to be respectful of the Councilwoman's time because she still is in budget hearings. So thank you,
Council
Councilwoman.
morning. It's council morning. I'm all ramped up now. I'm going to go back to council and be like, they told me arts and culture is not enough. What's the real money? But thank you so much to the African American Chamber. I really look forward to having these policy conversations about tax policy, because I think we really need to better define that space and who is in that conversation. Downtown is important. We've invested in downtown businesses. Neighborhoods need the same kind of investment, right? And we need to be clear on the terminology that we use, because every time we talk about neighborhoods, it's an expense. When we talk about downtown, it's an investment. We got to change all of that, and we have to do that first, right? We're the ones that have to say we need to do this for Black and brown businesses because it's an investment. It's an investment in our workforce and in our neighborhood. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And with that, we conclude our part 2 series. And as the Councilwoman said, investment, it's an investment in Black and brown businesses. And that is what we are here to do at the African American Chamber of Commerce, to continue to support the growth and the development of Black-owned businesses. So thank you. And we hope you have an amazing day. And we look forward to seeing you all at our next event.